Hello and welcome to The Print, and this is our show Soft Cover, where we digitally launch non-fiction book. And today we have The Company of Violent Men, where author Siddharthya Roy has described stories of radical Islamist terrorism in South Asia. And this book has been published by Penguin Publishers. And we will be discussing the content of the book and what led Siddharth to write this book and what was the thought process and what all he chose to include in his book, which he has described as a sort of memoir. So, welcome, Siddhartha, to The Print. Thank you for taking the time out.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So I will jump straight into the questions and say your perspective on what drove you to write this book. So I'll quote a para from your book to begin with. So it goes like to tell the story of what I heard after the news crews left, to share what I saw when I looked beyond the burqa and the beard, beyond the olive green of one fighter and the camo fatigue of other. And this is why this book. What are you trying to explain? Is it a sort of you are saying that you are trying to cover in this book what mainstream journalists or media could not cover because lack of bandwidth or paucity of time? What is it that you want to convey through this book?
So yes, of course, there's the paucity of time, the limit of word counts, the slavery of headlines. Forever the world has been at war for a very long time now, since 9/11. So there's this raging bull that's chasing all us journalists all the time. There's a bomb blast here, there's a hostage situation there. Go run, run, run. We have next to no time to pause and actually analyze an event and then move to another, or even understand these events in a continuum. That why did this happen and what did it have to do with the previous one and what it had to do with the one after. But that's one aspect of it. That's one aspect of it. And I would move away from doing the cliche of blaming mainstream media. To be honest, when it comes to giving little bites which have no depth, which have no time to actually discuss the topic and all, so-called anti-mainstream media, we might call them social media, you might call them influencers, whatever you might call them. They've done even worse, to be honest. I see the grandest of, most complex of political phenomena that happen all around, and it's reduced into a 30-second short video or something. So several things came together. Of course, there is, as you said, the paucity of time and all of that, the paucity of space to tell the stories which I wanted to tell. There's also the extreme reductive approach which leads to extreme polarized views of a certain person or a group of people. And lastly, of course, when we do news as journalists, the event is so big. It's always the event that's important, that we relegate all the humans caught up in that event to the back burner. We background them. Say, for example, if I told you that such and such bombing happened, say, for example, Lebanon or whatever, Tel Aviv, wherever there has been an episode, we'll say 150 people died or 170 people died. It doesn't even attach, that number doesn't attach to us as fellow human beings. We have no idea of actually who died and what happened. So, hence this book. But specifically, the para that you read, that is also my statement against reducing people into these tropes of, oh, this person has a beard. I have a beard. So, am I a terrorist? If somebody wears a burqa, does that mean that person is a terrorist? If somebody wears this color, doesn't mean he's a Hindutva? What does it mean? So, yes, it's my opposition.
In short,
Troping.
you try to move beyond the identity of the victims or, say, the perpetrators of the conflicts that you cover.
I did not actually. I took their identity along. I took their story along. It is completely all right to say that X belongs to certain religion and is a terrorist or a fighter or whatever it is. It's perfectly all right, but that shouldn't mean that, oh, the moment I have told the person's religion, therefore he or she belongs to a larger descriptive note.
Right.
And of course, in a sense, we do move beyond identities in the sense that I am speaking of these people in my book, the violent men and women that I am. interviewed, that I spent time in the company of, as fellow human beings, which is not to whitewash what they do or to justify what they do, but just to engage with those people.
Okay, moving ahead to the next question that I have, and considering that Bangladesh is in our news cycle again, going back to the cycle that you just emphasized on. So you
Mhm.
have worked extensively in Bangladesh on Rohingya issue in Cox's Bazar, but you made specific references to a blast or a say hostage situation in a bakery
Uh-huh.
in Bangladesh in 2016. At that time, you were in New York. You have
Mhm.
made that reference in the book, and you make a specific analysis that your reading of the hostage crisis in Bangladesh was completely different from your peers in New York. They saw that hostage crisis just another crisis, say, emanating out of terrorist groups such as ISIS, so which carried out attacks in Europe and different parts of Middle East. Why do you think your analysis was different from their perspective on terrorism, and to be specific, the bakery hostage crisis?
So several things stood out in the holy artisan hostage scenario. One of them is that, of course, they claimed that it's an ISIS attack. That was the first attack in anywhere in South Asia, which was officially claimed by the Islamic State. Now, what Western newsrooms did is that they were already reporting on Syria and Mosul and all these places, and they had done the ISIS beat. So they immediately took that episode and said, "Oh, this is a typical ISIS attack on such and such." And I said, "No, I disagree with you over there. Several reasons. Firstly, look at the profile of the people involved in that attack. They completely defy, the age-old stereotyping of the jihadist as this ignorant person, is an unreasonable person and whatever, uneducated, etc. All these young men were actually very privileged and very pretty well educated. Almost all of them had master's degrees and so on and so forth. The second part of it was that I was reluctant, and I'm glad that I've only been proven right with time. I always held that the ISIS as it existed in Syria and Iraq, it would be impossible to replicate that exact same model in South Asia. And when the attack happened, there was literally, if you look at the weaponry they used, they hardly had any weapons. They were butchering the hostages with knives and machetes and all, right? Now, what's the image that was built up? Think of the image of the ISIS that we built up before that. You said, oh, they are those people who carry those big guns and have big bombs and all. And I said, this
Big
looks like a more
car
organic
moving,
phenomenon.
moving from one place to another with the convoy.
Yes, exactly. Those big cars, they had all the Toyota cruisers and stuff. They had, well shot videos, etc. And I said that, look, even if they call themselves the ISIS, there are going to be cultural nuances which will be different. The subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent, is quite literally, geographically, culturally, historically very different from the Middle East. So we're going to have characteristics which are different from your cut paste. What do you say? Like boilerplate definition of ISIS. There. That's how I began disagreeing.
And you go on to describe another such terrorist attack, the Easter bombings in Sri Lanka. And you introduce a concept that I say found very interesting, and that's why I want you to say discuss it here for our viewers. And that is neo-jihadist. What does this term mean, and what do you mean by this? Like, is it a different form of jihadi attacks by terrorist groups, or like what is it that it was different from, say, conventional jihad that terrorist groups carried out in Middle East?
So, firstly, the history of jihad itself, as a holy war or whatever, it has existed all around the world and in the Indian subcontinent since a very, very long time, since before modernity. The concept of jihad has existed. And it carried with it, for the longest time, a certain approach, a certain grammar of how jihad was conducted. Thereafter, what happened is, with the rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan and then the Al Qaeda and all of this, they brought in a different kind of style of work. which was, the just making a paramilitary, quite literally. They had hierarchies which are very similar to militaries that work. They had a commandant, they had an area
Basically,
commandant.
their movement was organized in a much
Their
more
movement
organized.
was organized, yes, 100%. But no, and the interesting part is that the Al Qaeda always had a political movement associated with their militant activities.
Right,
There was a division of labor.
right,
Then came the ISIS, which destroyed all of these structures, and they said, oh, it's like a free for all. They
okay,
did not have a political movement uh, anywhere. They just started their violence off the bat first. Second is that it was a free for all, I say, because anybody could just pick up a bomb, blast it somewhere, and then say, I'm ISIS. There was no order, structure, and all of that.
right.
Now, when investigating Bangladesh and thereafter the Easter Sunday bombings in Sri Lanka, I saw that, the ISIS model of work had certain conflicts and limitations in the Indian subcontinent. The
Okay,
Al Qaeda in Indian subcontinent was already very active and a pretty long history of collaborating with the Pakistani establishment, for example,
right.
the ISI and the military. So I started asking questions as to these two models don't go hand in hand entirely. So what's going to be the future?
Hmm.
And that's when I started saying, this is a neo-jihadist. It's a new form of the jihadist movement, which will be somewhere between the Al Qaeda's very regimented way of doing their work versus
Vicious.
the ISIS, which is completely bonkers. And that's what we actually saw in Sri Lanka. That's what we did see in Bangladesh. A part of that is now visible in Kashmir as well. So there is very much a new movement where they don't necessarily are all very strong and uniform wearing people, but they are also not completely, mad and just lone wolves.
Going ahead and again going back to Bangladesh, you have also explained another technique that you have introduced in your book, and that is trap to technique by the former Bangladeshi Prime Minister Khalida Zia to promote Islamists, just to ensure that her grip on power remains very strong. So, what does this mean, say, and how was this done by her in Bangladesh, and how did it change the political landscape of Bangladesh, especially considering, say, as you are saying, that the AQIS was already active in Bangladesh? So, how did it propagate and change the political landscape, with respect to Islamists movement in Bangladesh?
So yet again, Islam as an ism, as a political ism, it exists in a continuum which goes from those who believe in conservative Islam and want a political system based on that, but they won't pick the gun up. So, for example, the
Jamaatul.
Bangladesh Jamaat,
Hmm.
no, Jamaat al-Mujahideen is different. So, the
Okay.
Jamaat, as we call them now, Bangladesh Jamaat. Now, it's not like the Jamaat. The Jamaat fights elections, right? It's a
Right.
participant. It was the third largest party. It was going through a democratic process of coming to power. We may disagree with their views and all of that. That's fine. But they were going through a democratic process and all. But then there were those who said, no, the democratic process isn't enough. We need more hardcore stuff. We need to
Hmm.
hit the streets and start doing protests and beating atheists up and whatever. And
Right.
then there was another group which he went even beyond and said, oh, no, sorry, none of this is going to work. We need to take bombs and guns and all of that and, just fight whoever is there in the middle.
Right.
Now, it was not easy. It's never easy for any violent ideology to just spread wherever they like through the people and find acceptance. The first round of Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh, JMB, which I investigated as you reference in my book, what had happened is that those areas were traditionally not supportive of the Islamist movement. In fact, they had a Maoist movement over there, an armed Maoist movement, but a Maoist movement nevertheless.
Hmm.
Now, what Khalida Zia did at that time is very simple. She did not have to do much. She just let the JMB under Bangla Bhai go do his thing,
Hmm.
and all she had to do was look away. Now, looking away as the head of a state is
Right.
the same as supporting something.
Right.
So yes, all political parties do use extremists to do their dirty work, and then they might kill the extremists. Sure.
I would like you to draw a reference to current situation now. So there are some scattered
Right.
media reports about attacks on Hindu minorities, and like obviously there are denial on the part of the current interim government led by Muhammad Yunus. But indeed, there are some attacks reported by even international media, and even our reporter went to Dhaka and different parts of Bangladesh to report such cases. So my question is like based on what you understand of the Bangladeshi politics, Bangladeshi society, and the groups which could have felt emboldened by the fall of Sheikh Hasina. When do you see Bangladesh coming back to normal? By normal, I mean where so there is peace on the street, or say governance issues get sorted by the interim government, or the interim government holding the next set of general elections. My question is that do you think that the situation in Bangladesh will get a lot more worse before it becomes better, or like do you think that in the near term the situation will be much better in Bangladesh?
I don't see the situation getting any better in the short term.
Okay.
When the day that Sheikh Hasina fled Dhaka and took shelter with the Indians, that very day we had the BNP and the Jamaat announce that they are looking to set up, and Yunus himself, that we are looking to set up a democratic government. We want to undo the illiberal acts, the undemocratic acts, which were very true. Sheikh Hasina did go overboard with a lot of what she did. There's no doubt about it. So they came with a promise that day that we're going to undo those. But then the rank and file of a lot of these parties, well, I mean, both these parties, BNP and Jamaat, they do belong to hardcore Islamist elements. I don't see them delivering on their promise of protecting minority rights. I mean, I'm not even going to that. Just today morning, I saw that they are out to, there's a mob out somewhere demanding the death of somebody without
Right.
trial on allegations of blasphemy.
Right.
That does not show Yunus or BNP or the Jamaat keeping up their promises. I do remember that the Jamaat just, I mean, a week or two before, the head of Jamaat said that show us one Jamaat person who is out there troubling any minority, and we will make sure we punish him. I am seeing videos of minorities being attacked, people who are different being attacked, and I don't really see this resolving in the near term. I wish it was a different answer I could give. I don't see this getting resolved in the near term.
Uh, Based on, say, you have done numerous research work on, say, Islamic terrorism, say, ISIS, and also AQIS in Bangladesh. And based on that, you have, in the third chapter of your book, you have made a reference that people very often conflate your journalism and scholarship of Islamist extremism as personal Islamophobia. So when
Yes.
did you encounter this? And if you can explain, if it's not very personal, if you
No, no,
can
no. It's personal in the sense.
why it was labeled against you that it is your personal Islamophobia to investigate
Right,
these
right,
Islamist
right,
terror organizations.
right. So, I mean, it happened so many times, really, that I still remember when I did my first investigation of the Holy Artisan attack. And I actually gave it to an editor in this country, a pretty well known person. It would be rude to take names, and hence I won't. And that gentleman simply refused to publish any of my investigations, even though he was the first person I gave it to. And instead, I saw this other person from Bangladesh doing these stories, which was completely ignoring that an attack had happened and was talking about the human rights issue.
Okay.
Now, this is a small example of how people take sides, and the reason I'm saying this is that those who call me those who would like to believe that just because I investigate extremism, Islamic extremism means I'm an Islamophobe. It is only their stunted view of scholarship and understanding. And to be quite honest, as a fellow journalist, you will know that journalism in India, and in most parts now for that matter, is a matter of performance. that I did an investigation in Kashmir. I remember uh, where I reported that the jihadists were sexually assaulting, raping Kashmiri women, and nobody had done a story about it. When I did that, the Hindu right wing of this country loved me. They like, and the left liberal segment, they called me closeted Sanghi and all of that. They said. The irony is the story right before that I had done was about, during the COVID time, you will remember that a group was stuck in Nizamuddin Dargah and all of that. And I
Right.
simply did a story saying that, dude, this is really not some COVID jihad or something. That's a very stupid term.
Right.
They were just stuck there. And what was the reaction of a bunch of people at that time? The people who loved me for my Kashmir story, they started telling me, "This Pakistan Jao, he's a, whatever, closet mullah and all of these things." And of course, the liberals loved me at that time. So it's their stunted view. As a journalist, I don't have anything to offer them. They can call me whatever they like.
I'll come back to India now because you have also reported extensively from Chhattisgarh. So you have made two reference to your two tours to the state badly affected by Naxals earlier. Situation is improving now. So first, you visited in 2018 to talk to the people involved in Naxalism, if they want, or people living in forest, if they actually believe in democratic process. Then you have gone on length to describe that you were detained by Chhattisgarh police and you were not allowed entry into the forest. And then last year, you again go back and you were investigating the story related to bombing in the forest area by drones. I would like you to highlight the challenges that you faced in Chhattisgarh because you have mentioned on numerous occasions that truth was the say victim while investigating those stories because there were different truths, spelled by one particular person based on the timing. So, how challenging was it to verify information in Chhattisgarh, especially related to Maoists, and like what was the response from the people on the ground? Like, are they truly believing in Indian democracy more than associated with Maoist movement, say 20 years back?
So let me answer the second question first. That are the tribals of Chhattisgarh and all these parts, are they bigger believers of democracy now than they were before? Possibly yes. The reason I add the word possibly is because did we actually have enough number of journalists go in and ask these questions to the people themselves? Even most of our Delhi-based journalists and all, we've never taken a trip down there and troubled ourselves to go inside. We relegated it to so-called local journalists to do that.
Right,
We haven't even asked them, and it is always a mixed bag, right? In a democracy like India, I might love certain aspects of it. I might disagree with several aspects of it. And the state itself might be good in some ways, but might be very harsh and unfair in many ways. So the tribals, what has happened in this, this war of words between whether you are an urban Naxal, as they say now, versus whether you are a nationalist. What has happened is we've completely forgotten the tribals and what they had to say in this.
right,
The one part is saying in another.
right,
Having said that, I do think, I mean, it's the signs are quite clear that the Maoists are extremely cornered and on a back foot like they never have been before. It is, of course, it is roads that are going, and of course, it is the building of, you know, I, hospitals, primary healthcare centers, and all of that. That's working. But there's also been a change in the approach of the Indian state towards combating Maoists,
okay,
which is that, for the longest time, the policeman, anybody in a khaki uniform, was an outsider to the lives of the tribals.
okay,
The Indian state has actually made an effort to recruit a lot of people from Bastar itself. In the CRPF, they have a battalion now called the Bastaria.
yeah, right,
So they are actually engaging, and this is breaking the back of the Maoists who traditionally could very legitimately say that we represent the tribals more than the Indian state does. So yes, things are getting better. Now to come back to the first question that you asked about why it was difficult, I consider Chhattisgarh to be the most difficult place I've reported in, is because of the web of lies that exists in that uh, area, that entire Maoist area, you say.
It's quite a
Uh,
statement
un-
to make after investigating Islamist extremism that Chhattisgarh was the toughest for you to verify information.
100%, 100%. See, there is a problem with insurgencies that go on for a very long time. The Maoist insurgency is far older than most of the other insurgencies that are there in India. When you have an insurgency which goes on for a very long time, a kind of status quo is achieved. There aren't very big highs, there aren't uh, deep lows, and
Right.
there are all these actors, on both sides of the conflict who find their little places and they're very comfortable over there. Comfortable because a war is not run simply on words. A war is run on money. You
Right.
need money to buy guns, bullets, logistics, and all of that. You need money for the state forces to go and come out and all of that. Where is all that money? The state, there is some accountability, but what about the rest of it?
Hmm.
So there are several people, as I've gone on record saying, I've written it in my book, that there are several parties involved in this conflict who are making millions of rupees, doing whatever middleman work they do. It is not in their interest to resolve this conflict. And one of the reasons they don't want, it was difficult for all journalists to go there is because truth is troublesome, no, for these middlemen. They want some variation of the truth to come out. They don't want the whole truth to come out. And quite honestly, I mean, I make no bones about saying this, that Chhattisgarh is a conflict where players on all sides of it, whether it is the state forces, the Maoists, the people who want to build their whatever construction work in the forests, or the so-called human rights and forest rights defenders, there are volumes and volumes of misleading lies everywhere. So,
Hmm.
as a journalist, just as a professional who's in the business of trying to tell you, okay, I'm not taking a political position, X has happened, Y has happened, and so on and so forth. I cannot do that very easily in Chhattisgarh. That's why I say it was one of the most difficult places to report.
Uh, I'm afraid we are running out of time, Siddharth. So we'll have to wrap up this. Thank you so much for taking the time out. And once again, for our viewers, this is the book, The Company of Violent Men, which encompasses stories from India's Chhattisgarh, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and especially decade long investigation on Islamist terrorism and extremism. Thank you, Siddharth, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.